Hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's meeting of Wharfedale Naturalists. I want to start by thanking Jeff. He's an unusual person to have to thank for this particular thing. He's provided the intro slides tonight. So thank you very much, Jeff, for that insight into Californian wildlife. It's lovely to see. I understand that we might have new members here, so I am going to just very briefly run through the way the webinar works. In a moment, I'll introduce our speaker tonight and we'll have the talk. If you wouldn't mind noting any questions that you have as we go along, in the Q&A, that would be very helpful. What we usually do is try to order them in a sensible order, and delete any duplications and so on, so that we've got a set of questions ready to go at the end. Jeff usually does that, so it's helpful to have the questions in advance if you happen to think of them in time. Of course, if you don't, it's also fine to put them in at the end, but ideally it's nice to have them as we go along. Okay, well, without further ado, I'm going to introduce tonight's speaker, who will be well known to very many of you. In fact, Anne said we always ask the speaker for a little bio, and Anne said, well, you might just want to say it's Anne again. But I think that wouldn't be appropriate, because though many of you will know Anne, there may be some of you who don't. So I'm going to do the little bio just as I always do. So Anne is from the great county of Lancashire. She's always enjoyed natural history. She went to Nottingham University, did a degree in pharmacy, which then became her career. It was at Nottingham also that she met her husband, Peter, who many of you will also know, of course. Peter was studying geography and was in his final year when Anne was in her first. And it was the fact that Peter got a job in Leeds that brought them both to the Yorkshire area. Then Anne worked at the LGI, Leeds General Infirmary, and Pinderfields in Wakefield, and then moved to St James's Hospital, where she spent 26 years until finally retiring, aged 50, very lucky, and was able to pursue her love of natural history and photography full time. Her interest in insects in particular started when she got her first digital camera about 20 years ago, and she realised what an amazing world of small things there was out there to be discovered. And her two Bibles in those early years were the Dorling Kindersley books written by George McGavin, who now of course has become well known to the Society. George has further inspired Anne's deep interest in the world of insects. And I'm sure that we have a treat ahead of us tonight, because Anne's pictures are always totally fabulous, and I am really looking forward to seeing some more of them. The talk tonight's entitled The Nature of Lockdown, Part 3. Over to you, Anne.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. So there we are. I hope that's clear for everybody. Well, here we are, and it's nearly 2 years since the start of that first lockdown. And I reckon that my interest in natural history has saved my sanity, or at least, well, just about anyway. And we know that immersing yourself in the natural world is good for your soul, but it's actually also good for your brain, particularly if you make the effort to look things up and learn. And that includes Latin names. Helen's always impressed when I come out with Latin names. And I have learned a lot of interesting things these last 2 years. And just another word about George. Yes, I've had his books for the last 20 years, but in 2017 got the opportunity to go on a holiday that he was leading to Costa Rica, and my interest in insects was inspired to a whole new level during that holiday, and now I can turn to him for help with ideas if I get stuck, which is great, and it keeps my enthusiasm going. And his passion for the natural world's infectious, and there's some exciting news which I will share really at the end of this talk, because he's got a new book coming out that you might like to hear about. Anyway, just to recap now the story so far, because it is a long time since I did the first two parts. The first one was in January 2021 and the second one in April 2021 about the year 2020. So just to recap. So in March, at the beginning of the lockdown, then the garden was getting quite interesting with bumblebees, like Jeff's shown his bumblebee today. Well, this is a garden bumblebee on Pulmonaria. And in April, I always like to go up onto the moor to look at the green hair streak, and especially when they're first out and they're really beautiful. Then in May, in the moth trap, we get the cockchafer or May bug, which is, of course, is a beetle, not a bug, and they are great fun to photograph. In June, I had this fantastic parasitic wasp on our Astrantia with its enormously long ovipositor, and towards the end of June, through June, July, we were getting elephant hawk moths, which are always nice to see. I had an interesting experience with a caterpillar inside the capsule of a campion flower, and it was a campion caterpillar, appropriately enough, and I found lots of little holes in my meadow crane's bills, and they were caused by this weevil, appropriately the meadow crane's bill weevil. Mullein moths ate all my figwort, and emperor moth caterpillars that I'd reared thanks to Nairi were getting really rather large and very spectacular. Nice 6-spot burnet in the garden in August, and towards the end of August, these interesting parasitic flies, conopid flies, known as the bee grabber, because the female will grab a bumblebee in midair and lay her egg, and that grows inside the unfortunate bumblebees, and so they're really very interesting flies if you like that sort of thing. And that brings us to this picture, which you will gather I really rather like, since I've used it as my background, these aphids on a scabious stem. So that brings us to tonight, when I will endeavour to get to the end of December, although I suppose in theory I could go until the February of 2021, but I won't. So continuing in August, we had quite a wet spell of weather, and when I did get out in the garden, everything was very soggy, including these bees, and I noticed them around the knapweed. I think this is actually on crown vetch leaves, and one very soggy bee, and then I found several bees that looked pretty similar on a knapweed head, so I started trying to find out what they were, and the clue came. So I looked through my BID book, and the clue came when I read that this particular species and the males congregate on flower heads, particularly knapweed, and I thought, oh, that's them, and everything else matched. So this is Lasioglossum calceatum, the common furrow bee, and it's a solitary bee. That is, you know, the one female, one nest, no workers, in the northern part of its range, but apparently in the southern part of its range, it's considered primitively eusocial. That is, the female will dig a nest, lay just a few eggs, and from those eggs will hatch females with underdeveloped ovaries, which will become her workers. Anyway, I don't know whether we're north or south, I never do. So the fact that there are several male bees together doesn't give any clue as to what the females are doing. But I thought that was quite interesting. And another solitary bee that's definitely a solitary bee, for years we've been getting this bee, and I've always called it my tansy bee because it seemed particularly fond of the tansy plants. And it is in fact a Colletes bee, one of the plasterer bees, so called because the female lines her nest cells with a material that's a bit like cellophane, which is very clever, and so that provides a waterproof layer and also protects against things like fungi. And it's Colletes davisanus, which is quite common in gardens, so that narrowed that down when I read that. And in the moth trap, quite often we get this rather spectacular looking wasp. You can see it's a wasp when you look at the waist like that, and it's an ichneumon wasp, a parasitoid wasp with the long, many segmented antennae, and it's probably the yellow Ophion luteus. And these wasps have fascinating life cycles, parasitoid wasps, things that eat other things alive from inside. And in fact, it was the existence of these wasps that first led Charles Darwin to doubt the existence of a creator God. And what he said was, I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created the Ichneumonidae with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars. So there you go. And I will say a little bit, well, so this wasp, in fact, its victims are a couple of noctuid moths, heart and dart, a very common one, and turnip moth, which is less common. They're caterpillars. It will lay an egg inside the caterpillar, which will then be consumed from the inside. But the life cycle of some of these wasps is extremely sophisticated, that they can, by chemical means, influence the behavior of their victim so that it optimizes the chance of their offspring surviving. I will tell you a little bit about that later with another example. This is another parasitoid. It's not an ichneumon. This is one of the chalcidoid wasps, so called because of the metallic colour, and the Greek for copper is chalcid. And it's a very large group of wasps. The wasps themselves are tiny mostly. This one would be about 4, maximum 5 millimeters, as you can see from the grass seed heads. But I think it's absolutely stunningly beautiful. It's got beautiful, delicate wings, this lovely metallic colour and red eyes. I think it's gorgeous, but it's not if you happen to be its intended victim. Purple loosestrife. Purple loosestrife, a lot of purple loosestrife in flower through August, and it's quite a showy plant, much enjoyed by bees and hoverflies, rich supply of pollen. Just looking at this buff-tailed bumblebee here, you know that bumblebees on their hind legs have got pollen baskets, this slightly concave area where they pack pollen grains. And the system is that they start packing from the bottom and the pollen moves up as they add more to it. So if you're looking at a pollen load, the bit at the top will be what was collected first. And a bumblebee can carry, on average, 25% of its body weight of pollen. So that's pretty hefty load to take back to the nest. And the purple loosestrife is an interesting flower in that it has 3 different forms, devised so that it doesn't self-pollinate. Most flowers don't want to self-pollinate, not a good idea. You want to be cross-pollinated. First of all, the female bits mature first, it's protogynous. And secondly, it's got 3 different arrangements of filament anthers and the female bits in terms of length, so that the pollen from one does not suit itself. Now, it's such a showy, attractive flower that when people went to America to settle in the 1800s, they took it with them. It was really nice, grow in the gardens. But like many introductions, it went wrong. It is somewhat like Himalayan balsam, the story, because it established in the wild, it established all over the place, it choked out native plants, it sent anything that was dependent on the native plants had to move to less suitable places. There were declines in all sorts of species. still there now, and they can't get rid of it, because although the settlers took the plants, or at least the seed, they didn't take the natural predators, because in this country and in Europe, where it's native, it will have a whole array of predators and controls, from weevils and leaf beetles, fungi, you name it. And you take a plant out of context and it may thrive beyond all imagining. So purple loosestrife, lovely here, under control. Take it to America and it is absolutely rampant. And of course we don't learn, although I suppose in the 1800s they hadn't got quite as much experience as we have. And I really like the stamens close up, and the turquoise pollen. I think they're absolutely gorgeous, just make a nice picture. Sometimes it's nice just to take a nice picture, whether you can find anything out or not. And another flower that's blooming at this time of year is the devil's bit scabious and Successa pratensis, and the bumblebees love devil's bit scabious. And this is another plant with an interesting history. The scabious bit might give you a clue that in ancient times it was used as a treatment for scabies, and scabies comes really from the Latin to scratch, scabere. Now, because it was so useful, the devil was really quite cross about this useful plant that was helping humanity. So he bit the root in a fit of rage, and the root apparently is truncated. I've never dug one up to have a look, but that's how it got the name devil's bit scabious. But it didn't actually have the desired effect for the devil, because it was still said to be useful for all sorts of ailments. This is one of 3 big hoverflies that we get, the Volusella hoverflies, and this one is Volusella zonaria, and it's a wasp hornet mimic, and it lays its eggs in wasp, around here wasp because we don't have the hornets, wasp nests, where the larvae more or less don't do any damage. They just live as commensals, just eating up debris and a few dead larvae and so on. So it's a scavenger rather than a parasite. It's a very spectacular hoverfly. I think this is the biggest of the 3 that we get here. I think there's another one, but we only get 3. Now, this created quite a stir in our household, because we were having our tea in the conservatory when all of a sudden I noticed a shape on the outside of the window, and it looked interesting. So mid-tea, put my knife and fork down, grabbed the camera, went outside, and to my delight saw this very spectacular fly, which I'd seen once before and struggled to identify, but I knew that it was a snail killing fly. And so I took a couple of pictures. Now, if you notice in this photograph, you can see some silk strands down here, and this fly is not treading any too carefully. And whilst I was taking the pictures, a spider appeared from the corner of the window and grabbed my beautiful fly and proceeded to stick venom in it and wrap it up into a nice neat parcel and then hang it up in its larder. So that was the end of this snail killing fly, only the second one I've ever seen, but at least I did get some pictures first. So I managed to identify the fly, Corymaceae marginata. It's the larvae that that attack and kill snails, by the way, not the adult fly. But I'm not very good at spiders. I really get stuck with spiders. So I sent George a picture of the spider and the fly and said, is the fly this Corymaceae marginata? And by the way, have you any idea what the spider is? And the answer came back that it was Zygiella exnotata, not Lice, because that's a spider that really likes to live in the corner of window frames. So that's a clue. So now I remember that. See, spider in the corner of window frame, we'll start looking to see if it matches the description of Zygella exnotata. Now, this isn't a spider, this is a harvest man. So it's an arachnid, it's got 8 legs. Oh, and spiders and harvest men are not insects. You know, it's amazing how many people think that spiders are insects. Well, count the legs. And the arachnids have got 8 legs. And there are lots of other differences, of course, but you know, that's a start. And insects have 6. But harvestmen differ from spiders in that they have just this one body section. They don't have the cephalothorax and the abdomen, the 2 sections. They just have the one. And the eyes as well. They usually have 2 eyes mounted on this like little turret, which is quite the ocular tubercle, and the legs are in this great big M shape, if you like, with the body slung at the bottom, and that enables them to walk across vegetation, walk across leaves, span big gaps. They're mostly nocturnal hunters, and they're omnivorous. They'll eat all sorts of things, from squashed slugs to bits of vegetation, you name it. And that's a harvest man. They're called harvest men because they are particularly noticeable in the autumn. This one is an invader, actually, this Opiliocanestrinii is a fairly recent colonist, and it may be that it is displacing some of our native harvestmen. Now, these are spiders. These are spiderlings. This was in the spring, but I put this in because I want to show you what they grow up to be. These are the young of the garden cross spider, Arrhenius diadematus, and you get them in these clusters the first few days after they've hatched. The eggs overwinter. They hatch in the spring and congregate in these webs, and if you touch the web, they always scatter and disappear into the foliage, and then you go away, and then they'll come back again. And they do that for a day or 2 before they disperse and go and live their individual lives. And then this is either a grown-up or a part grown-up one. In Britain, apparently, it's a 2-year cycle to get to maturity. So in the first winter, the spider will overwinter as a juvenile and become fully mature the next year. Now, this one is definitely mature. I'm sorry if there are any people who any arachnophobes out there, as this is really quite spectacular. And you can see it's diadem, Arrhenius diadematus. And the female can grow up to nearly 3/4 of an inch. So really it's quite a big spider, and they're the ones that build the big orb webs that you see around the garden in autumn. And we had another one around the same time. There was a really very dark colour. The colour does vary from red to almost black. And this was a gorgeous, rich sort of brown colour living in a knapweed head, seed head. There are a lot of things in seed heads in our garden because we don't clear them away until, well, now really, and even then you've got to be careful because there might be things that have nested in there or overwintered in there. And knapweed seed heads are quite attractive in their own right, but certainly they are favoured by various insects and spiders. Now, another plant. This is goldenrod. This, I think, is the actual proper goldenrod, Solidago virgoria, as named by Linnaeus in 1753 or whatever. Thank goodness for Linnaeus, so we know what we're talking about, because so many plants have got lots of common names, and in one part of the country there might be such and such, another part of the country something else. So only by having this binomial Latin can you be sure that you're talking about the same plant? Anyway, that's its name. And solidago comes from solidare, to make whole, solidarity, I suppose. And in the Middle Ages, in the 1600s, it had a reputation as a wound healing herb. And because there were a lot of stabbings and knife wounds at that time, it was much in demand, such that it was imported. It wasn't known to grow locally, and it commanded an incredibly high price, so that you could pay half a crown for an ounce of this stuff. Now, a little bit later on, somebody found it growing rampant on Hampstead Heath, so it completely lost its value and lost its credibility. And as the herbalist John Gerard said, no man will give half a crown for 100 weight of it, esteeming no longer of anything, how precious soever it be, than whilst it is strange and rare. So it fell out of favour. There you are. But it's a fantastic plant in late August, September, for bumblebees, and the goldenrod's at its best when the male whitetail bumblebees come out, and they are a gorgeous bee. I find it impossible in the field to tell the difference between a buff-tail bumblebee worker and a white-tail bumblebee worker, because they both have white tails. It's the queens who have the buff tail. But when it comes to the males, the white-tail male is really spectacular. A new one out. It's a lovely, fluffy bumblebee enjoying the goldenrod. And this interesting, very smart little wasp appears in September, and it's one of the potter wasps, so called because the female, when she makes her nest, this particular species, or what it's likely to be, will nest in hollow stems, and between each cell where the eggs are laid, complete with paralysed caterpillars for food, she puts a clay plug. Now, some of the potter wasps build beautiful little flasks of mud, but we don't have any of those around here as far as I know. I would love to see the Heath potter wasp with its little pitcher pot. And a little bit closer just to show you, it's really a very attractive wasp. And so I'll let it come on my finger so I could have a better look. This is a male. It's got hooked antennae. Up the road on my walk through Scalebore, a lot of the horse chestnut trees were going very brown indeed. And so I thought, well, it must be horse chestnut leaf miner. And I hadn't actually seen the moth. So I thought, right, well, there are obviously a lot about. I'll make an effort to find this little micro moth, Cameraria oridella. And there we are. In fact, there were clouds of them. It was just getting them to stay still that was the problem. And again, it's the larvae who are leaf miners in horse chestnut and cause the damage to the leaves. And the damage does look quite dreadful, but in fact, the leaves, when they go all crispy and brown, will drop off. New leaves will come out. The tree can withstand the attack. It's not as dreadful as it was thought when it first appeared, however many years ago, although repeat infections will undoubtedly weaken the tree. But it's a very attractive little moth. As many micro moths are, it's just that they really are micro mostly. So, well, how far have we got? September and October. One day in the garden, I noticed this little myrid bug trying to change its skin. So I thought, well, it's becoming an adult in sea wings, but it looks a bit funny at that end. And I kept going back and having a look, and it hadn't got any further. I thought, well, it's stuck. There's something gone wrong. And whilst I was considering the possibility of a forceps delivery, another bug came along. And this is Deriocoris ruber. It's a predatory bug belonging to the same family, the Myridae, and it got its mouth parts, because bugs, of course, have got this rostrum, which is has several segments and is very maneuverable, and it can stick the very sharp end into its victim or leaf if it happens to be happens not to be predatory, if it happens to be a plant feeder. And bugs can only suck up liquid food, so if it's not liquid, we're going for the hemolymph inside, but if it needs to liquidize whatever, then it will pump enzyme containing saliva into the victim and then suck up the resulting soup. It's all very, very clever it is. Oh, and there's a little trick here I keep forgetting to use, because you can zoom in on a bit and you can actually see the tip of its rostrum going right inside the bug. I'm not really bloodthirsty, but it's really fascinating. And it'll suck out one bit and then it goes round to the leg and it sucks out the good bit of that, like getting meat out of a lobster. And then it's nearly completely sucked that poor little bug completely dry. So you see, you don't need to go to Africa to watch lions, which I think is incredibly boring, quite honestly. You can get all this excitement in your own garden. September is also the season when a lot of shield bugs are maturing. Another bug, many of the shield bugs are plant feeders. Some of them are predatory and some of them will just opportunistically, have a caterpillar if there happens to be one around. This is one of our commonest shield bugs. It's the Birch Shield Bug, and this is a nymph which is nearly ready to molt it for the last time, maybe five instars into an adult. And you can see that because you can see its wing pads are coming down. So it's getting well on with its development. So this one is Birch Shield Bug and it's relatively small. And that's a full adult. Now this one is Hawthorne Shieldbug. The Birch Shieldbug feeds on birch, strangely, and the Hawthorne on Hawthorne, although they will each feed on other deciduous trees. And the Hawthorne Shieldbug is bigger and it always has some red on its shoulders. But there's quite a variation in colour. Now this, I think, is a very fashion-conscious Hawthorne Shieldbug because it's sitting on a dogwood leaf that really matches its colour scheme really beautifully and very attractive. And this one in the garden is a Hawthorne Shieldbug that has just changed into its adult plumage, if you like. So it's still teneral. But you've already got the red on the shoulders, and I just thought that was really rather a nice colour scheme. And so that feeds on the leaves of hawthorn and other trees. Now, another bug that we've been getting for only the last few years, Coryzus hyoscyame, which is spread up from the south, belongs to the Rhopalidae. It feeds on plants, and this one also is a teneral, so it's not got its full colour, and this is a full adult. And I think it's a very striking bug and it's easy to identify. And then I had a little play with green shield bugs because that's the one we get most commonly in the garden, and I wanted to get a photograph of all the stages and make a nice thing of all the different molts, instars 1 to 5 and adults, but in the end I couldn't work out where the wing pads were up to, but they did make a nice picture. And this one was just the most beautiful newly molted, very pretty colour on a knapweed head. And then these are just further green shieldbug nymphs in various stages. Those are early, these are a little bit later, and these are getting more mature, and I couldn't narrow it down any more than that. I need lessons. This is a woundwort shieldbug inside a scutellum Fractalaria seed head, and this is a nymph not far off, turning into one of these, which is a very attractively coloured shieldbug, quite a small shieldbug, much smaller than the Hawthorne Shieldbug, a lovely mixture of greens and bronzes. And seed heads again, 7-spot ladybird, getting ready for hibernation, testing out, I think it's an Aquilegia seed head, Campion seed head, 7-spot ladybird. These flies are about for, well, February, March, I haven't seen one yet, March through to November, the ensign flies, and they're just very attractive, and they sit and they wave the wings and do a bit of semaphore, so I like to photograph them. And another Volusella Hoverfly, another one that lays its eggs in the nest of wasps. And this is the pellucid hoverfly, Volusella pellucens, a great big fat hoverfly that tends to stay still in mid-air. It's got quite a characteristic jizz. Stoneflies, very primitive order of insects, Plecoptera, which means braided wings, and I'm finding them already, so they are out very early in the year, and they have aquatic larvae, and these are important trout food, and it's a sign of an unpolluted river, you know, a good population of stonefly larvae, because they like well oxygenated, unpolluted water. Not very glamorous, you know, but there we are. And spiders again, this just was a very attractive one of the money spiders. And ivy. Now, why on earth do people want to chop ivy off trees? Because ivy does not kill trees. Ivy is not a parasite. It's not feeding from the tree. It makes its own food. It might just use the tree as scaffolding. So unless the tree is old and weak, and the weight of the ivy is such that in a gale maybe the ivy is not helpful. It is such a wonderful plant. Or even on walls, you know, it helps preserve walls. So it's very sad when you see ivy hacked off a few feet from the ground, because in the autumn it provides the most wonderful supply of pollen and nectar, and then later on, of course, the berries. And everybody likes ivy, so we've got honeybees, and we've got hoverflies, and we've got bumblebees, and then the wasps absolutely love it, biting into a nectary. And this is a common wasp with this anchor mark on its face. I just like that because it looks like it's just chilling out there on the ivy. And then autumn colour. Well, it's always worth looking at autumn colour, and I'm sure you know all about the leaf pigments and the chlorophyll production that gives it the green that stops in the autumn as the daylight disappears and it gets colder, revealing the yellow of the carotene, and then if sugar can build up in the leaves to enough of an extent so the sugars can react with the sap, you get the anthocyanins, and they give you the rich red. So depending on the combination of sunlight and temperature, you can get a really good autumn. So you want sunshine, you want cold but not freezing, and you don't want it damp. And then you get the maximum production of anthocyanins and beautiful autumn colours. Purple loosestrife goes a nice colour as well. We don't pull that out. And oak is not the best tree for producing colour, but you know, by this time of year the insects are getting a bit few and far between, so I start looking at other things, and so I started turning oak leaves over and noticing galls. Now, what is a plant gall? Well, you know, a plant gall is an abnormal growth induced by the presence of another organism living on the host plant, causing its cells by chemical probably or mechanical means to enlarge or multiply and provide the gall causer with a home, basically, with shelter and importantly with food. So it's very clever, and lots of things can cause galls from fungi, mites, but probably most commonly gall wasps. And so I decided I would look at a few galls and try and learn about them and learn the Latin names of the wasps that were causing. Now this is a silk button spangle gall, and it just looks like it's been embroidered. It's absolutely gorgeous, and the little wasp, and they are little. I've not seen them. I would love to photograph them, but you're talking 2 millimeters, you know. So won't hold my breath, but I'll do my best. So Neuroteris numismalis is the name of the wasp that causes this one. That's from the internet. That's the wasp. And there we are. And I kept taking close-ups to try and get a really nice depth of field on it. And then this is the common spangle gall, which again, this is a different wasp, and this is another Neuroteris, Quercus baccharum. And the gall wasps, there's not enough time. You could spend a whole evening talking about gall wasps, because many of the gall wasps have a very complicated life cycle in that they will have both sexual and then asexual generation, and that they will gall different parts, maybe of the same plant, maybe of different plants. Some require 2 species of oak tree to complete their life cycle. And this is rather fun. That was one I used on the introductory slide because it looks like a pair of eyeballs. And these are cherry galls, and these are caused by Cynips quercus folii, and also on the back of oak leaves. Different parts of the tree can be galled. It can be the bud, it can be the leaves, it can be the rootlets. And an artichoke gall, I wanted to see one of these. I read about them, and I actually did manage to find one, and it looks like, you know, it's a bud that's gone wrong, which it is. And the chamber for the wasp is actually another hard little bit right in the middle of the artichoke bit. And this is an Andricus fundatrix, ficundatrix, and quite spectacular. And then an actual oak apple. I used to call marble galls oak apples. We'll see a marble gall in a minute. And this can be quite large and might have lots of chambers. The others tend to have, you know, one wasp per gall. This one multi-chambered, and of course it's not just the wasp. Where you've got your wasps, you are going to have parasites on the wasps, so you're going to have maybe many different parasites and hyperparasites, and you'll have other wasps who can't make galls themselves lodging in there, the inquilines. So it'll be quite a complex community inside a gall. It's all very interesting. And this one, the oak apple, is Biorhiza pallida, different sort of name. And then this is your actual marble gall. This is the one that you get gall ink from. This is the one that in George's documentary Oak Tree, Nature's Greatest Survivor, he describes, tells you all about oak gall ink. The Magna Carta is written in gall ink, the American Declaration of Independence. It had an enormous part to play in our history and the recording of it. And obviously the owner of that has exited, and that's the wasp again. I had to pinch that from the internet. That's Andricus collari, and it didn't occur natively. It didn't occur in this country. They were imported until the wasp was brought over in the 1800s. But I think the galls here are not good enough, don't have enough tannin in to make decent ink, and we don't use that sort of ink anyway. Nopper galls caused quite a stir when the Nopper gall started appearing in the 1960s, because they grow on acorns, and the fear was that, you know, there won't be any acorns to make more oak trees. But in fact, it's only a small percentage that are infected, but it's a really quite spectacular gall. Andricus quercus gallicis. And as they mature, they go all this rather rich red colour, so quite photogenic. And at this rate, you know, I'm not going to get to the end of December, so I will just go fairly briefly over these. Bark lice, again, you poke under leaves, you find interesting things. These are also known as book lice, and they eat all sorts of bits and pieces, starchy stuff, and they can, in homes, they can get into book bindings, but the more live out in the open countryside, don't cause any problems, but they're quite pretty, about 3-4 millimeters, and more bark lice than a bark louse nymph. And a non-biting midge with its fantastic antennae and this colour on the wings because of thin film interference, because of the way the light's hitting a very thin film, which made it attractive. And the flower bug that bites me and makes big lumps. And another little bug that is present in the garden most months and is, I think, quite attractive. And then springtails. I really got rather attached to springtails, which aren't even insects. They are hexapods. They've got 6 legs, but they are not classified as insects. Their mouth parts are on the inside, not the outside. But I just think they're really very pretty, the little globular ones. They're about 2 millimeters, 3 if you're lucky. And rather cute, and there are different forms of springtails. These are very important. You can get 100,000 springtails in a square metre of soil, and they have an important role to play in breaking down organic matter and getting nutrients recycled. And we got Helvella crispa in the garden near the gate, and I just thought it was quite sort of suggestive of a ghosty or a ghoulie, and it was Halloween, so I dressed it up. And November and December, we've still got the springtails on my mucky windowsills, all sorts of things. If you just have a look, springtails, and an aphid mummy, if you remember from last time, that's been parasitized, and an ichneumon without any wings, a small group, but again, it's a parasitic wasp, and another rather attractive spider, because if you look closely at its palps, they look like little Viennese whorls. That's quite nice. That's Leptophantes minutus. And shield bugs are getting ready to hibernate, and the green shield bugs turn brown for better camouflage. Hoverfly larvae are still about, eating aphids. See, there's such a lot, if you just bother to look, even through the autumn, you can find all sorts of interesting things within 1 mile, 2 miles of your home. Harlequin ladybird larvae, eating aphids, and this harvestman spider with a very characteristic pose. Now this is trying to pretend it's harvestman. It's trying to pretend it's not a harvestman because it's got some legs missing, so it's got 8 legs, and a female with a prominent abdomen. Ladybirds are still about, orange ladybird, cream spot ladybird, 7-spot ladybirds going to hibernate, 10-spot likewise. The witch hazel in the garden, the leaves are still hanging on, still an attractive colour. And the mahonia, which had come into blossom, had some hawthorn berries stuck through it. I didn't do that. I just thought it was rather striking. And I don't think I've got time to tell you about the wasp larva that's an ectoparasite on this poor little orb weaving spider, but that's going to suck the juices and then eventually kill the spider and pupate in a web that it's specially commissioned the spider to make. And a different wasp, this is a tree wasp. And I haven't got time to tell you about this beetle that's a red-legged hand beetle. Appeared in the kitchen, and fungus gnat on a nice oyster mushroom fungus. And the fungus, when you start poking about it, it's got all sorts in the soldier beetle larvae, more springtails. And springtails are called springtails because they have this device, a little prong, a furcula, which is pegged in place, and if it releases that, it hits the substrate and it tumbles unpredictably, so it's no use for locomotion. It's very good for escaping from predators. So it might be simple, but it's got a little cunning trick. And they groom themselves. It's got a little drop of liquid here, and they keep themselves very clean, do springtail, and it's just grooming itself with a droplet and smiling whilst it's at it. A larch ladybird out very late, and stoneflies mating even in December. And money spider getting ready to do its ballooning trick. And then in desperation, because again, I'm really not finding very much in the insect world, I looked at lichens. And that will be a whole nother subject, but they do make a really very attractive picture, especially when they've got raindrops on them. And of course, a lichen or lichen fungus is a symbiosis or a mutualism between a fungus and either a cyanobacteria or an alga that makes the sugars for the fungus, which of course can't make its own food, but they're very attractive. And then lastly, I decided that this Cladonia fungus would look really nice if it had a tree hopper on it. Now, I said I was going to tell you about George's exciting book, because, you know, if you really are interested in the natural world, then you really do need to know about insects, because they have a vital role in every ecosystem. And without insects, the world wouldn't work, you know. And if you want a novel way of learning about this, this is an audio book, not a written book, and George is reading it. And I've heard the first chapter and I've seen the script, and I can tell you it is full of fascinating facts. It will make a very good listen, and it's going to be released very soon. You can get it on Amazon, and I would highly recommend it. So don't ask me too many awkward questions, but thank you very much.
And thank you. I think I'm too exhausted to ask questions. That was fabulous as ever, and the action going on while you're taking photos and predation is taking place in front of you. That's brilliant. And who knew there were patterns of Viennese whorls on a spider? Great. I knew you'd do some close-ups, which is why I put a couple of photos of blue whales on the intro slide. Contrast. So with a little bit of time for questions, please put them in the Q&A if you have them. One in there already is my favourite question of all these webinars so far. So you mentioned, Anne, about the buff-tailed bumblebee loading its pollen sacs from the bottom up, I think.
Yeah.
How does it unload?
Do you know, I haven't a clue. As far as I know, it will scrape them out, but you know, in which order? I don't know. That is a very good question.
That's just a brilliant question.
Yes, it is.
That was from John Anderson. Thanks, John, for that one.
Yes, right. I'll see him later. Yes.
I know a lot of these were in your garden, but I know some were sort of round about the area. Do you notice now there are still as many people out enjoying nature as there were during lockdown?
Oh no, thank goodness there aren't. No, that's right. No, it has gone noticeably quieter. But of course, the people I came across were not enjoying nature. They were taking the dogs out for a walk and you know, yakking 90 to the dozen in big groups. So no, I'm a bit cynical about this reconnecting with nature. Reconnecting with nature is, you know, spending an hour or two staring at some interesting happening like that miry bug eating another one, you know, in the vegetation. That's connecting with nature. So, but there definitely there are not as many people now.
And I suspect this is a fairly impossible question. Which photo are you proudest of the ones that you took during lockdown?
Well, I do like my aphids on the stem just because I like the lighting on it. And although they're not all perfectly sharp, I like that because it's just a bit different. And it is, you know, it's a genuine photo. It was just lucky the way the light was coming through. So as an image, I like that one. I quite like the myriad bug with its rostrum right inside another one. That's pretty nice.
Have you, or are you planning to submit any for awards?
Sorry?
Have you submitted any photos to any competitions?
Oh, no. I think there was one online one during lockdown, and I certainly never heard any more about that. But no, I haven't. No, they're not that sort of quality, really.
Well, you say that, but that was a question I had, and it's not me alone. Sue says, "And your photos are so brilliant, far better than those of insects on the Countryfile calendar competition."
Oh yeah.
So
that's very kind.
I'm not the only one who thinks they're great. Yeah, time's pressing on. So thanks ever so much as ever, Anne. I'll pass back to Helen to sum up.
Oh. Sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble with my video button there. Well, as always, Anne has not failed to meet her usual standards. I mean, absolutely fantastic visual evening. I never cease to marvel at Madame's pictures. They are absolutely fabulous. I hope you don't enter any competitions, Anne, because nobody else will stand a chance. They are absolutely stunning pictures. And what I always love about your talks is that it isn't just the pictures, marvelous they are. You know, your talks always come with all this erudition. We always get some Latin, some Greek, some etymology, some history, as well, of course, as the very, very detailed natural history and information about, you know, the lives and the habits of these incredible creatures that most of us barely notice. So thank you so much, Anne, for bringing this world to life for us all this evening. I can't help thinking that the nature of lockdown for you was very much more interesting than it was for so very many other people, just because you know how to look and how to see the things that are there, you know, around us within feet to be seen, if only we all knew quite what to be looking for. So many thanks again, Anne. And I think it's right to say that perhaps we'll see you again next week. Is that right? As part of the recorders evening.
Yeah. Yes, that will definitely be briefer.
But thank you. Thanks very much. Jeff always saves me when I can't quite remember what I've seen on the slide that's gone past earlier on. So next Tuesday, 8th of March, we're going to have the recorders evening, which is always one of my favorites. I love the recorders evening. And we're going to have butterflies from Nairi Fernley, bryophytes from Gordon Haycock, and ladybirds from Anne. So I expect there might be a few more very lovely pictures coming up next week. So hopefully we will see very many of you back then. Thank you. Good night.